Winter for the Vikings was not just a change of seasons, it was a harsh test that challenged them every day. Have you ever wondered how people could survive in the bitter cold when warm clothing and reliable shelter were often lacking? It seems incredible, but the Vikings found the answer right under their feet. They did not fight the cold in the usual sense. They used life itself as a source of warmth. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn how the Vikings turned animals not only into food and clothing, but also into living heaters, without which survival in the harsh Scandinavian climate would have been simply impossible. What if I told you that the Vikings valued the warmth of an animal as much as its meat? For them, winter was not just a backdrop, but a constant, tangible threat that could take lives. Stones and fire, seemingly natural sources of heat, were often in short supply or unavailable for constant heating. Therefore, the ancient Scandinavians used what was always nearby and could serve as a universal resource, living creatures. They did not just hunt or raise livestock. They integrated animals into their very system of survival. Animals were much more valuable than gold, providing not only food, but also clothing, and most importantly, life-saving warmth. They were not kept separate from everyday life in pens or distant barns, as is customary today. Humans and animals shared a common space, and this was absolutely normal, not a sign of extreme poverty. This coexistence created a unique microclimate that helped everyone survive the winter. The whole way of life was built around this principle, where each animal played its part. From sheep, which provided wool and skins, to cows, whose warmth heated the house, they were all part of a big family. This attitude towards animals formed a deep connection between humans and the natural world. Sheepskins, for example, were much more than just bedding or clothing. They were the basis of the entire heating system. They were used with the fur on the inside to preserve the natural heat of the human body. The skins retained warm air, creating an insulating layer, and did not allow moisture to pass through. This allowed them to work effectively even in wet and damp environments, which was extremely important in the harsh northern climate. These skins served as a bedding and a basic element of clothing, providing comfort in the coldest conditions. They were affordable and easy to process, making them the ideal solution for every home. Fur products provided protection from the biting wind and freezing rain, allowing the Vikings to live and work outdoors. Sometimes the skins were used to insulate the walls of dwellings to minimize heat loss. This was an example of how simple solutions became the most effective in conditions of scarcity. Sheepskins not only provided warmth, but were also a symbol of prosperity and practicality. In every home, you could find stacks of these skins ready for use. This was not a luxury, but a necessity that everyone appreciated. They were the foundation of home comfort, where everyone could find their place in warmth and safety. Do you think such close coexistence with animals can be considered a manifestation of deep respect for nature, or was it just a desperate measure for survival? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about the amazing life of the Vikings. Want to know the main secret of Viking home heating that shocks many modern people? The territory where the Vikings lived was known for its long and cold winters, which required special solutions for survival. Often, there was not enough wood or stone capable of retaining heat for a long time to heat homes. Therefore, The ancient Scandinavians developed a system that allowed them to use the living heat of animals. On cold nights, when the temperature outside dropped to critical levels, livestock was brought inside the living quarters. Cows, sheep, and goats shared the space with people, becoming part of domestic life. This was not a whim, but a necessity, and such a practice was widespread. The heat from the animals' bodies accumulated in relatively small rooms, significantly increasing the overall temperature. Each animal worked like a living hot water bottle, giving off its heat to the surrounding space. Of course, living with animals had its drawbacks, such as smell and dirt, but in the harsh winter conditions, these factors were secondary. The main thing was to stay warm and survive, and cleanliness took a back seat. People understood that without this warmth, their chances of survival were significantly reduced. Dogs, man's faithful companions, also played an important role in this heating system. They slept with their owners, snuggling up to their bodies and covering exposed areas that could quickly lose heat. Their fur retained heat much more effectively than many types of fur used for clothing. It was a win-win situation. The dog received warmth and protection, and the person received an additional source of heat. The interaction between humans and dogs was inextricably linked to survival in the cold. They shared not only their home, but also their bed, creating a warm and safe environment. This practice allowed the Vikings to save precious firewood and other types of fuel, which were difficult to obtain in winter. The warmth of animals was free and constant, making it an indispensable resource. They made the most efficient use of all available resources to combat the cold. Using animals for heating was a simple but ingenious solution that demonstrated the Vikings' deep understanding of the world around them. They knew how to find a way out of the most difficult situations using what nature gave them. This was an example of how adaptation and ingenuity helped them survive. But knowledge of animals was only part of their skill. In the next chapter, you will learn how the Vikings turned ordinary wool and fat into ideal materials for protection against the most severe frosts, and why they surpassed many in the art of surviving in the cold. You've definitely never heard of this unique secret. What if I told you that the Vikings used a material that kept them warm even when wet? Wool was not just a fabric for clothing, it was a true wonder of nature, perfectly suited to the harsh Scandinavian climate. Its unique properties allowed the Vikings to withstand the lowest temperatures and high humidity. One of the main advantages of wool was that it retained its insulating properties even when wet. This was critically important in conditions of frequent rain, sea voyages, and fog. Unlike cotton or linen, wet wool continued to retain heat, saving people from hypothermia. Wool also had excellent breathability, allowing the skin to breathe. This prevented overheating during physical activity and rapid evaporation of sweat, which reduced the risk of colds. They wore woolen clothes in layers, creating air pockets that further retained heat. This was an effective way to regulate body temperature, depending on weather conditions and activity level. The top layer protected against wind and cold, while the lower layers provided constant comfort. Each wool fiber had a complex structure that helped trap air. Such layered clothing was a key element of the Viking wardrobe, allowing them to work outdoors, go on long journeys, and go out to sea. Wool was lightweight, durable, and affordable, making it an ideal material for everyday use. Each family produced wool for their own needs, from shearing sheep to spinning yarn. But it wasn't just wool that played an important role in combating the cold. Animal fat was another indispensable resource that the Vikings used everywhere. It was used not only for cooking, but also for warmth and protection from moisture. Animal fat was used to impregnate clothing, especially outer layers and footwear. This created a water-repellent barrier that prevented moisture from penetrating inside. This treatment significantly increased the life of the clothing and its protective properties. Fat was also used to lubricate the skin, especially before going out in frosty or windy weather. It created a thin, protective film that reduced heat loss and protected against frostbite. This natural barrier helped to retain body heat. The use of fat was a simple but effective way to combat the cold climate. It was available on every farm, and its use did not require complex technology. The Vikings knew how to get the most out of all available natural resources. Like this video if you've ever thought about the genius of simple solutions that helped people survive in harsh conditions. What you are about to learn will change your perception of Viking life. Have you ever considered that even manure could be a source of heat? It seems unusual, but the Vikings used every means available to survive the cold winters, and the biological heat of animals was one of them. In rooms where livestock was kept, such as longhouses, groups of animals gave off a significant amount of heat. The heat from their bodies, breathing, and digestion naturally warmed the air. The more animals there were in the room, the higher the temperature. In addition, the manure that accumulated in the stalls slowly decomposed. This decomposition process also released heat, providing additional warmth. Thus, manure was not just waste, but part of the overall heating system. Rooms with animals were always warmer than those without, and this was obvious to the Vikings. The difference in temperature could be significant, which helped maintain an acceptable microclimate inside the dwelling. This heat was constant and did not require additional fuel costs. The smell and dirt that inevitably accompanied such cohabitation were the price of life and survival. In conditions where every day was a struggle against the cold, these inconveniences were considered insignificant. The main thing was to preserve the life and health of the whole family. This was an example of a pragmatic approach to life, where survival was paramount. Vikings could not afford the luxury of perfect cleanliness when it came to battling nature. They understood that every animal and every resource had its value. In addition to manure, the hay and straw that covered the floors of the stalls also created an additional insulating layer. This layer retained the heat emitted by the animals and prevented it from quickly escaping into the ground. They made the most of every detail of their daily lives. This approach to using biological heat demonstrates the remarkable ingenuity of the Vikings. They did not simply adapt to their circumstances, they actively used them to their advantage. It was part of their philosophy of survival in a harsh world. Overall, the animal-based heating system was complex and multifaceted. It included body heat, manure decomposition, and the use of wool, which together provided effective protection from the cold. But what happened when the animals got sick? In specific conditions, when domestic animals shared a cramped dwelling with humans during the long winter months, the issue of hygiene became particularly relevant. But the Vikings approached it in a completely different way than we do. Cleanliness in the modern sense was of secondary importance to them. Physical survival and staying warm always came first, without question. This does not mean that they lived in complete unsanitary conditions or chaos, but their priorities and criteria for cleanliness were based on the harsh realities of the era. For people of that time, sterility was not only unattainable, but also simply dangerous, as it would deprive them of their natural protection against the elements. In Scandinavian culture, animals were not considered dirty or unclean creatures in the negative sense that we tend to perceive them today. They were seen as a sacred and invaluable resource, as an integral part of the family and household, directly providing people with food, materials for clothing, and vital warmth. The entire life of the community was so closely intertwined with livestock that this connection was considered absolutely inseparable and natural. The Vikings understood that the well-being of cows or sheep during the winter was a guarantee that their children would live to see the next spring. Viking children grew up literally side by side with animals, getting used to their constant presence, sounds, and specific smells from an early age. This unique experience from infancy formed in them a powerful natural immunity to a huge number of bacteria and microorganisms that could be deadly to modern pampered humans. Their entire complex way of life was built on constant and close interaction with nature, where humans did not separate themselves from the rest of the animal world. This hardening made their bodies incredibly resistant to external irritants and diseases. Although the Vikings did not have modern scientific knowledge about microbes, viruses, and infectious diseases, they had developed their own effective way of dealing with everyday sanitary challenges. Regular cleaning of common areas, as far as the technical means of the time allowed, and mandatory ventilation of rooms helped to maintain a perfectly acceptable level of hygiene. They intuitively used natural methods to maintain basic cleanliness, understanding that stagnant air and dirt were harmful to both people and livestock. The house had to breathe, even if an ice storm was raging outside.
Yes, just like that.
For example, excess manure from the stalls was regularly and thoroughly removed from the house to avoid excessive accumulation and the development of putrefactive processes. This was critically important not only for the formal cleanliness of the floor, but also for the health of the animals themselves, whose hooves and skin required dryness. The Vikings masterfully found that delicate balance between the effective use of animals as a powerful source of heat and maintaining acceptable living conditions for sleeping and eating. Cleanliness, in their view, was a matter of order and functionality, not aesthetic pleasure. In addition, the harsh northern climate itself, with its long winters, significantly contributed to the natural slowdown in the spread of many types of dangerous bacteria and viruses. Extremely low temperatures acted as a natural disinfectant, effectively destroying a significant portion of pathogens in living areas. This natural factor was another ally of the Vikings, helping them to survive successfully in conditions of overcrowding and close contact with wildlife. Cold, being an enemy to the body, paradoxically became a protector of the community's health. They also possessed an extensive collection of herbs, resins, and other folk remedies for the prevention and treatment of various ailments in both humans and their animals. Unique knowledge about medicinal plants, methods of harvesting and using them was passed down orally from generation to generation. This centuries-old experience was an integral part of their complex culture of survival and system of mutual self-help within the clan. The lady of the house often acted as a healer, knowing exactly which herb would help with inflammation and which root would strengthen a warrior's strength before a campaign. In general, the Vikings never considered living with animals under the same roof to be something wild, shameful, or dangerous. For them, It was part of everyday reality, the only possible strategy that ensured the survival of the clan in conditions of fuel shortage. Their remarkable adaptability to the environment, combined with healthy pragmatism, allowed them to find effective solutions even in the most extreme and difficult everyday situations. This experience of coexistence between humans and nature created the very unshakable strength of spirit that we admire in the sagas. What if I showed you how Viking architecture was thought out down to the smallest detail to effectively combat the cold? The longhouse, which the Northerners themselves called longhouse, was not just an ordinary dwelling, but a complex engineering system. It was ideally suited for survival in the extremely harsh northern climate. Its unique design included solutions aimed at maximizing heat retention, including heat from domestic animals. Every log and every stone in this structure served one purpose: to keep people from freezing during the long winter.
Move along now.
The central part of such a longhouse was usually a large common room with a massive hearth in the middle. It was around this fire that the whole extended family and their numerous guests gathered on cold evenings. However, one of the most surprising features was the presence of specially designated areas for keeping livestock right inside the house. Most often, stalls for cows and sheep were located at one end of the long room. This allowed the natural biological heat of live animals to be used for additional heating of the entire huge dwelling. The walls of the longhouse were usually made of wood, massive stones, or thick layers of peat. This combination of materials provided excellent insulation even in the most severe frosts. These materials were readily available in the wild northern nature. They were durable and extremely effective at retaining accumulated heat. Peat, for example, had excellent insulating properties and did not let the piercing wind inside. The thickness of such walls could reach a meter, which turned the house into a real warm fortress. The roof of the house was often completely covered with a layer of turf on which thick grass grew over time. This created a powerful additional layer of natural insulation and reliably protected the inhabitants from moisture and snow. Turf was a very heavy material, but it was its weight that helped to press the roof tightly against the frame, protecting it from storm winds. This green carpet on the roof perfectly retained the internal heat, preventing it from escaping into the atmosphere. In addition, the porous structure of the turf provided natural and very gentle ventilation of the room. Inside the house itself, there were no small partitions or separate rooms. This allowed the heat from the central hearth and animals to be evenly distributed throughout the available space. A single thermal circuit was created, which minimized any loss of precious energy. All family members lived, slept, and worked in one large common space, constantly supporting each other with their presence. The absence of unnecessary walls also made it easier to keep an eye on the order and condition of livestock in winter. The windows in long houses were made very small, and often there were none at all. If there were openings for light, they were tightly covered with skins or specially treated animal bladders. This was done to minimize any escape of warm air to the outside. The meager daylight penetrated inside only through small openings in the roof or through doors that were opened for a short time. The main priority for the Vikings was always to conserve heat, not to provide good lighting in the living quarters. The floors in the living area of the house could be simply earthen or carefully laid with flat stones. However, they were almost always covered with a very thick layer of fresh straw or dry hay. This layer of vegetation served as reliable additional insulation from the perpetually cold ground and made staying in the house more comfortable. Hay also excelled at absorbing excess odors and moisture, which inevitably accumulated in a closed room. Regularly changing this bedding helped to keep the house relatively clean and fresh. The rooms were ventilated through special adjustable openings in the roof or upper parts of the walls. This allowed for the effective removal of acrid smoke from the hearth and excess moisture, while preventing significant heat loss. The ability to find the right balance between fresh air and maintaining the temperature inside was a key skill for the owner of the house. The Vikings intuitively understood the laws of air movement and used them to their advantage. Properly adjusted ventilation protected people from lung diseases and excessive dampness. Thus, the Viking longhouse was not just a simple shelter, but a carefully thought-out engineering structure. In this project, absolutely every decision was aimed at collective survival in harsh climatic conditions. The use of domestic animals as living heaters was organically integrated into the overall life support system. In the next chapter, you will learn how the Vikings dressed to keep warm on their expeditions. Their clothing was not only practical, but also surprisingly sophisticated for its time. The Vikings did not have access to modern synthetic materials, but their clothing was surprisingly effective in combating the cold. They used available natural resources with maximum ingenuity and resourcefulness. The Northerners created complex, multi-layered outfits that provided reliable warmth and protection in the harshest conditions of a journey. It was a true art of survival, literally embodied in their everyday clothing. Each item of clothing had been tested for centuries in conditions of icy winds and salty spray. Viking footwear was always made of genuine leather, and for winter it was often insulated with thick fur or layers of wool. Leather boots were usually made tall to effectively protect the feet from deep snow and icy water. To make the shoes completely waterproof, they were regularly and generously impregnated with tar or animal fat. Dry grass or moss was often placed inside the boots to serve as an additional insole and absorb excess moisture. This allowed the feet to remain dry even after a whole day of walking through swampy terrain. Raincoats were the most noticeable and absolutely essential part of any Viking's wardrobe. They were worn over all other clothing to provide reliable protection from strong winds, heavy rain, or heavy snow. Raincoats could be made of very thick felted wool, or the skins of large wild animals with thick fur. Often these capes were equipped with comfortable hoods for additional protection of the head and neck. A good raincoat could also serve as a warm blanket or even a temporary sleeping bag when spending the night in the forest. The Vikings protected their heads and necks especially carefully, using woolen hats and fur hoods for this purpose. They knew very well that heat loss through the head could be enormous and critical to health. In the conditions of sea voyages, where the icy wind blows from all sides, keeping the head warm was a matter of life and death. Leather or fur covers were often worn over the cap to completely block out the cold air. The ears and back of the head were always kept warm, which protected warriors from colds and frostbite. Hands were protected with woolen or leather gloves, as well as mittens, which were often insulated with fur on the inside. It was simply impossible to perform any heavy work in extreme cold without reliable protection for the hands. The Vikings took great care of their hands because the accuracy of a sword strike or the strength of an oar grip depended on their strength and health. Every detail of the mittens was designed so that a warrior could quickly take them off in case of a sudden attack. Taking care of the limbs was part of the overall strategy of maintaining the combat readiness of the unit. All Scandinavian clothing was extremely simple in design, but at the same time as functional as possible. It did not restrict movement at all and allowed people to perform the most difficult physical work. This was critically important both for warriors in the heat of battle and for peaceful farmers or craftsmen in their daily activities. Every fold and every seam had a practical purpose and was tested by the harsh realities of life. Practicality in their culture always took precedence over beauty or elegance of finish. The colors of clothing were most often natural, with a predominance of calm, earthy tones. These colors were obtained from simple, natural dyes that were readily available to every housewife. This was not only practical in terms of camouflage and wear, but also harmonized with the surrounding northern nature. Thus, clothing was not only protection from the elements for the Vikings, but also a vivid reflection of their unique culture. Do you know what foods helped them stay warm when even the warmest clothes couldn't cope with the cold? Wool production was a key aspect of the Vikings' economy and survival, a kind of foundation on which the entire northern society was based. It was not just a mechanical process, but a real family ritual in which absolutely everyone participated, from small children gathering scraps of wool in the pastures to the elderly. Each stage, from the spring shearing of sheep to the manufacture of finished clothing, was imbued with deep meaning and required special skills passed down from generation to generation. Without wool, the expansion of the Vikings would have been impossible, as it was wool that protected them on the open sea. Sheep were sheared once or twice a year, usually in the spring, when the animals began to naturally shed their thick winter coats. This process was extremely labor-intensive and required physical endurance, but it was vital for obtaining high-quality raw materials. Sheep were sheared with special forged shears or very sharp knives, trying to preserve the length of the fiber. Often, the wool was not simply sheared, but carefully plucked during molting, which allowed for the softest and longest undercoat to be obtained. After shearing, the raw wool had to be thoroughly cleaned of dirt, prickly plant debris, sand, and natural animal secretions. This was done by hand or by washing in running water, after which the wool was laid out to dry in the sun. Then came the combing stage. The fibers were untangled using special combs with metal or bone teeth. Combing made the wool more airy, soft, and uniform, preparing it for the most important stage, turning it into thread. Spinning was the most common and endless occupation of Scandinavian women, accompanying them from dawn to dusk. They used simple but effective spindles with stone or clay whorls, masterfully transforming a shapeless mass into endless strong threads. This process required tremendous patience, perfect eye measurement, and trained fine motor skills. The spinning wheel was a woman's companion everywhere, at home by the hearth, at ting meetings, and even during short stops on hikes. The threads could be of various thicknesses and degrees of twist, depending on what exactly was to be made. Coarse and thick threads were used to make heavy, windproof cloaks, warm blankets, and sails for drakkars. Thin and even threads were used to make underwear and more elegant, festive clothing. Each product ultimately had its own unique texture, in which an experienced eye could recognize the signature of a particular craftswoman. After spinning, the finished threads were often dyed to give the clothing a festive look and indicate the status of the owner. The Vikings used only natural dyes, which they extracted from local plants, tree bark, forest berries, and various types of moss.
A fine cloth.
This allowed them to obtain a surprisingly wide range of colors, from deep browns and ochres to rich reds, obtained from madder and blues from woad. Colored clothing was a source of pride and often served as a valuable gift or commodity for trade. Weaving was another complex stage, transforming thread into fabric. Women used traditional vertical looms where the warp threads were stretched using heavy stone weights. These looms were used to create fabrics of the desired width and length, often decorated with intricate ethnic patterns. Weaving was a long, painstaking, and physically demanding process that required complete concentration, but the result, durable fabric, was truly invaluable for the clan's survival. The finished woolen fabrics were then cut and sewn into clothing according to patterns that had been tested over centuries. For this, the craftswomen used thin bone or metal needles and strong woolen or linen threads. The sewing was extremely simple and functional. It did not restrict the warrior's movements and at the same time ensured the exceptional durability of the garments. Each seam was made with particular care because a person's life could depend on the strength of their clothing during a harsh campaign. Some types of woolen fabric, intended for particularly extreme conditions, underwent additional processing, fulling. The fabric was soaked in hot water for a long time and subjected to intense friction and beating, which led to the fibers becoming entangled and the material becoming denser. The result was a cloth that was virtually waterproof and impervious to even the coldest ocean winds. This process transformed ordinary wool into a veritable bulletproof vest against cold and damp. Wool production in the Viking Age was not just a craft, but a fundamental way of life that ensured the biological survival of the entire community. Every thread in a sail, every patch on a warrior's jacket was the result of enormous collective labor and high craftsmanship. It was the ultimate embodiment of their ability to adapt to a harsh world, turning the gifts of nature into protection. Animal fat was another versatile and strategically important resource that the Vikings used in almost all areas of their lives. It was used not only to warm the body, but also for high-calorie nutrition, lighting dark dwellings, and technical protection of equipment. The importance of fat in northern latitudes cannot be overestimated, especially when it came to survival in the polar night. Fat was a concentrated source of energy, without which life in Scandinavia would have come to a standstill with the arrival of the first snowstorm. Fat occupied a central and honorable place in the Vikings' diet. It was the most calorie-dense food, providing warriors and sailors with the energy they needed to maintain their body temperature and perform heavy work. It was added in large quantities to porridge, meat soups, and even flatbread to make food as filling as possible. Fat helped the body cope with the stress of constant cold, acting as a kind of fuel for internal metabolism. In addition to nutrition, fat played a key role in preserving perishable foods such as meat and fish. The products were tightly packed into barrels and poured over or coated with a thick layer of melted fat, lard, which created an airtight protective barrier. This layer prevented air and bacteria from penetrating inside, preventing decay. This technology made it possible to create huge reserves of provisions that remained edible during the long winter months and during long sea voyages. Fat was also absolutely indispensable for lighting dwellings, as wax candles were a rare luxury. In the longhouses of the Vikings, stone or clay fat lamps were widely used, flat bowls filled with melted lard. Dried moss, twisted wool, or wild plant fibers were usually used as wicks. These lamps provided soft, even, and fairly long-lasting light without requiring complicated maintenance. Oil lamps were extremely simple to manufacture and operate, providing reliable lighting during the long winter when the sun barely rose above the horizon. Light in the home was not just a convenience, but a psychological necessity that helped combat depression and maintain social activity. The dim but constant flame of an oil lamp was a symbol of home comfort and security, around which the clan's life bustled on cold evenings. In addition to everyday needs, fat was widely used as a powerful technical means for processing wood and leather. For example, wooden parts of drakers, especially those below the waterline, were generously impregnated with fat or a mixture of fat and tar.
Pull together, lads. Higher on the cleat.
This created a water-repellent layer that protected the wood from rotting, swelling, and the destructive effects of sea salt. In this way, fat literally prolonged the life of ships, allowing them to sail the oceans for years. Leather items such as shoes, belts, bags, and armor also needed regular and thorough care with fat. The thick lubricant made the leather softer and prevented it from drying out and cracking after getting wet. Boots soaked in fat became virtually waterproof, which was critical for foot health when crossing swamps or snow-covered forests. Leather care was a daily routine for every self-respecting warrior. Fat also served as a universal lubricant for various tools and mechanisms, greatly facilitating labor. It was used to lubricate the axles of heavy carts, parts of looms, and door hinges to reduce friction and prevent rapid wear and tear. This simple remedy allowed equipment to run more smoothly and last longer, saving the community time and resources. In this sense, fat can be called the first machine oil of the Middle Ages, without which many mechanisms would simply have broken down. Thus, animal fat was a multifunctional and indispensable resource that played a crucial role in ensuring the physical comfort and biological survival of the Vikings. Its availability, ease of processing, and versatility made it one of the main treasures of northern life. It was not just a byproduct of hunting or cattle breeding, but a vivid symbol of the ingenuity of a people who managed to benefit from every gift of their harsh land. The Vikings never tried to fight the cold head-on, pointlessly investing all their energy and scarce resources in creating artificial ideal conditions, as we tend to do today. Their survival strategy was much more subtle, profound, and natural. They learned to use living heat, literally integrating domestic animals into the very fabric of their daily existence. This was not just a forced choice, but a whole philosophy of life, where absolutely every available resource had its highest value and specific purpose. They did not separate themselves from the outside world with walls, but made the world a part of their home. A deep understanding of this unique philosophy allows us today to take a completely new look at their way of life, which may seem excessively harsh, crude, or even unfamiliar to modern people. For northern warriors and farmers, practicality always unconditionally prevailed over any luxury, excess, or aesthetics. The main and only goal was to ensure the biological survival of the entire community during the long polar night. If an item did not help to keep warm or obtain food, it was considered a useless burden, unworthy of attention. Every element of their daily life From the fundamental construction of a longhouse to the choice of material for clothing fasteners, was dictated by harsh climatic necessity. The Vikings had a unique ability to see great value in things that modern city dwellers might consider insignificant, dirty, or even unpleasant. It was true pragmatism, elevated to an absolute and tested by centuries of continuous struggle for life. They understood that in the icy wilderness, any miscalculation could cost the entire clan their lives. Domestic animals were not just property for them, but loyal and equal allies in the eternal struggle with unpredictable nature. They not only provided people with nutritious food and durable materials for crafts, but also served as an invaluable source of constant heat, which allowed for significant savings in firewood and other scarce fuels. This close biological relationship was the unshakable foundation of their lives, turning the longhouse into a single ecosystem. Humans and animals coexisted under one roof, exchanging warmth and energy for the common salvation from the cold. Their entire unique culture was built on a deep respect for available resources and the ability to use them as efficiently as possible. They knew perfectly well how to extract tangible benefits from every little thing that the stingy northern nature gave them, from sheep's wool to whale blubber. This was sacred knowledge that had been honed over centuries and carefully passed down from father to son as the most precious inheritance. Nothing was thrown away, nothing was wasted. The cycle of resources in their society was practically perfect. Their comprehensive approach to survival in the conditions of eternal cold was not just a set of random techniques, but a holistic and logical system. It harmoniously included specific housing architecture, methods of producing multi-layered clothing, ways of rationally using animals, and much more. All these disparate factors worked in powerful synergy, reinforcing each other and creating a reliable shield against the elements. When clothing warmed the body, fat provided energy from within, and the warmth of livestock heated the air in the house, the frost became merely a backdrop to life. Today, we can only sincerely marvel at their incredible ingenuity and spiritual fortitude. The Vikings did not have the advanced technology that we have, but their natural resourcefulness and ability to adapt instantly allowed them to thrive in the harshest parts of the planet. This was an outstanding example of survival in complete harmony with nature, rather than in spite of it. They did not remake the world to suit themselves, but adjusted their rhythm of life to the breath of the North, finding in this source the strength for great achievements.
Hallow this ground. Shield us.
Their legacy to us is not only heroic sagas about gods and daring sea voyages in search of gold, but also invaluable lessons in practicality. They taught us to appreciate the simplest things and find effective solutions in conditions of extremely limited resources. This knowledge remains relevant today, when the issue of rational consumption and environmental friendliness is facing humanity with renewed force. The Vikings proved that the human mind is capable of overcoming any obstacle if it works in harmony with the surrounding world. They clearly taught us that survival is not always a fierce struggle, but often a wise ability to coexist, to use what is already at hand wisely, and to see the hidden value in all living things. This was their main, most closely guarded secret in their endless struggle against the cold. Respect for the warmth of life allowed them to remain human where nature itself seemed to forbid any movement. We have seen that the Vikings' approach to survival in the cold was surprisingly holistic and pragmatic. They used animals not only as a source of food and materials, but also as an integral part of their heating and protection system. Living together, using skins, wool, fat, and even the biological heat from manure, all of this was part of an ingenious strategy. Their longhouses were designed to make the most efficient use of all available heat sources, and their multi-layered woolen clothing, impregnated with fat, provided protection even in the harshest conditions. The Vikings did not fight nature. They found ways to live in harmony with it, taking advantage of every element. Their adaptability and ingenuity allowed them to thrive in the harsh Scandinavian climate, leaving us with a rich legacy of practical knowledge. What part of this story did you find most surprising? Perhaps it was sleeping with animals or using manure for heating. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn more about the amazing Viking era.